John has just told you that it was at pretty short notice I came here. I was visiting Len Donaldson, National President. We've been pretty close friends for about 40 years. And he recently had to have a bone biopsy where they stick a hole in your tail end and cut out a bit of bone. Not much fun from what I've gathered because he was in a lot of pain. But instead of getting better, he started getting worse. And I'm scratching around here looking for something because I wanted to tell you that I do own a tie. And there's a story behind it. Forgive me for unpacking half my kit in front of you. But so I was visiting our national president and he took this phone call, as John just said. He said, "I need a speaker." And Len says, "No problem. His name's Bill. He's standing in front of me." He said, "Here's the phone. Talk to him." So I'm here. This was not on my list of things to do, but I rang John this morning and said, "What's the dress code? Do I have to wear a bag of fruit and a tie?" He says, No, but I see that Tim's properly dressed. Thank you, Tim. You make me feel good. I'm not going to put it on. If you'd look closely, you'd see that's an FGBMFI tie, a Singapore version from going back about 30 years. I'm not going to wear it because it's got an awful food stain on it and it needs dry cleaning, but I wanted you to know that I do own one. And the story behind that is, while I was working for a fellow back in the 80s, about the mid-80s, I found myself driving into the city one day for no good reason. I had a company car. I used to come to Sydney a lot. I knew my way around in Sydney 30 years ago. I dare say it's a bit different now. But, and I was on the Southeast Freeway driving into the city. And I'm having an argument with myself saying, what are you doing going into the city? You have no cause to go there. And have you ever had an argument with yourself and lost? I think it's a sign of insanity, but and I thought, well, this is pre-internet days where you could do your banking online and all that, of course, but I thought I'll go and see how much is in the bank account and see if I can pay some bills this week. You know? So I parked in the city, I got out of my car, fed the meter, got out of my car and walked up. It's behind the Catholic Cathedral, St. Stephen's Cathedral in Brisbane, and the short, well-dressed Chinese gentleman walked past me, going the opposite direction. And he was wearing one of those ties. Of course, the first thing I saw was the Full Gospel Businessman's Fellowship emblem on his tie. And I thought to myself, oh, that's a bit odd. That little Chinese dude had a Full Gospel Businessman's tie. And a voice inside of me said, well, why don't you go and say hello to him? So, good Lord, sorry about that, folks. I just knocked the water over. So, have we got some tissues or something? It's just going to make the carpet wet. Don't worry about it? Okay. I do worry about those things. It makes me wonder if I'm going a bit, you know. But, so I caught up with him and I tapped him on the shoulder and he spun around and he looked at me. And yeah, that's very clever. And thanks. I've got a couple here as well. So while we're mopping up the mess for the sake of the camera and the video, good way to start a meeting, isn't it? I suppose there's only one thing worse, is that's to turn up with your zip undone, isn't it? You know, I saw a fellow taking up the offering in the church one day and I said, and he looked at me and I said, zip up, yeah. You shouldn't say those things at these meetings, should you? But praise God. There comes a time in life where you've got to get over being embarrassed. Not worry about it. Okay, thanks so much. Okay, here we go. You won't tell my wife I did this. She'll say, yeah, that'll be you. Can't take you anywhere, Dad, the kids would say. You know, food all down your shirt. Okay. I'm not going to feel too bad about it, because if you read The Happiest People on Earth book, you'll find in a situation where Demas was in one of his more challenging meetings and not making any headway. And without thinking, he put his dairy farmer's boot up on the white tablecloth to do up his boot. And the meeting changed like that. Have you read it? Have you not read Happiest People on Earth?
I've read it, but I can't.
Oh, folks.
I'll read it.
John, get on to Lynn. Get him to send you some copies. I mean, look, they're only about $10 each or something like that. I guarantee you will learn so much from it. It's a testimony like no other. And of course, Demas, not every meeting went as he had hoped. And he went to this meeting and he was getting nowhere. And he's telling these men that he was a dairy farmer from Downey, California, and everyone's just sitting there, like, you know, until he put his boot up on the table, on the white starch tablecloth, he foot up. Oh, now we know you're a dairy farmer, you know. So I'm not going to get upset about that. Okay, so I met a fellow, this wasn't in my notes, so I met a fellow called Don Chung, and from Singapore, and he said, well, let's go have coffee. So we went and had a meeting, and I'm on a parking meter, so I couldn't stay. But he said something. He said, Bill, you are my friend for life. And he said the same thing to Len, my friend for life. And some 11 or 12 years later than that, our friend for life had moved to Perth because of his wife's employment. Don had a lot of difficulty working as a lawyer here. There are too many lawyers in this country, it seems. He couldn't migrate as a lawyer, but she was able to emigrate as a geophysicist. And the Lord directed him that way, and that the company took her to Perth. And we heard he got admitted to the bar in WA, and then 2 months later we heard that he'd just been sent home from hospital with inoperable cancer. So on December 1, 1984, Len and I, as it happened, Qantas had a special on. I was able to get us both to Perth and back from Brisbane for $900. And we went over to visit our friend for life a couple of months before he died at age 49. He was not an old man. And there's a few things we could say about Don. If I get time, I might talk about it later, but I did prepare some notes. You know that I'm an old fellow when I use paper notes. Today, for the first time ever, I did an electronic boarding pass, but it worked. So I'm learning, Paul. You've got some lovely technology here. But so we'll get to where we are. So having been asked at somewhat short notice to come and share with you here tonight, I soon came to the realisation that we can share in experiences which I present as having had the intervention of the one who inhabits eternity. I think the prophet Isaiah talks about him in those terms. The one who inhabits eternity. I say that because we get so engrossed, not supposed to preach at these, but we do. We get so engrossed with our physical status that we forget that one of the primary things that Jesus taught his followers was, there's a resurrection coming, people. Think about that. Think about it more than you think about where you are now. I think if we did that, everything would have a totally different perspective. Well, I better stop preaching. So that my prayer for you tonight is that we may know his presence and that he has spoken to our hearts. Now, I get the feeling that for every one of you here, this is nothing new. Is that a fair comment? Okay. There's no one here who doesn't know the Lord. Is that right? Am I right in saying that? Okay. Back in the day, in the 80s, when things were firing, I know some of the chapters wouldn't have a meeting unless there were some folk in the meeting who were not born again. And I frankly didn't agree with that. I said, well, we are the Full Gospel Businessmen's Fellowship International. What's wrong with sharing some fellowship? Notice that the other group that looked like we might getting some reconciliation with dropped the fellowship out of their name. Did you notice that? FGBA. It's Full Gospel Business, not fellowship. We'll move on. I was going to start this off by asking you folk to just sort of get together and pray for one another, so that if you get a bit naughty and drop off during the night and go home and don't hear me, at least you'll have had some prayer. Maybe I'll just pass that and come back to it later. So we won't talk about that anymore. John has already mentioned the vision of a full gospel businessman, to reach other men, fellows who are at where we are at, okay? John has mentioned it, I won't labour it, but you know, there was a threefold part of the vision: reaching other men, having fellowship, and having a basis of unity, okay? That's it in a nutshell. You can read it yourself. I would urge you to get hold of Happiest People books. It's in there. Might be a little dated now, but the message is never dated, okay? And the encouragement you'd get from it, likewise. So I guess we better get back to the testimony, or testimonies, plural, that I had in mind to share with you tonight. Probably the most dramatic thing. I'm not going to sort of bore you with being a baby boomer, went to school and all that. We talked about some of that at dinner. But there's a couple of things that have happened regarding which I have no other explanation but to say the hand of God was on my life. The fact that I didn't die when I was 39 and on a couple of other occasions is part of it. And sometimes you can just brush those things off. You can let it go under the back storage of your memory and not think about it. But there's been a few occasions. I've had about 4 occasions when I might not have survived. So I'll tell you the biggest one first, okay? 1984, a fellow called John Callaghan, who joined our Aspley chapter, as it then was. John had come over from Western Australia to Brisbane. He had worked in the Department of Aviation as something to do with health. His trade was plumbing, but he had some health and hygiene aspect to do with aviation. I can't define it any better than that. But he had come to the Lord. He was a fairly new Christian, but he was also a pretty good country gospel singer. And he asked me if I would take him to Taree, which is a little north of here, correct? Which way is north? Which way are we facing? Anyone tell me? North that way? Okay. He was invited to present and share and sing at Taree. Now, this is going back to 1984. And I said, well, when? He said, middle of the year, June. I said, great. June, you might get a bit of wind, southwesterly. It might get a bit choppy. But other than that, it's okay. It will be generally clear weather. Now I still hold a private pilot's license. Don't use it because I'm not sure I could trust myself with it. But, you know, the price of flying went up higher than my income. My income went down, my costs went up. So I haven't done any of it since the year 2000. So it's a dormant license. But in 1984, John asked me if I could take him to Taree. And the difficulty in Australia is, you know, you've got a weekend to do something, but you work Monday to Friday, it's just too far to drive. So being able to fly was very, very convenient, and we did that a fair bit. I said, yeah, no trouble. And then a few months later, he said, I'm putting it off till September. And I said, oh, okay, but September is change of season, afternoon storms. You know, and in my head, I'm trying to think of the meteorological picture. And I was a bit uneasy about it. And then he changed it to December 1 of that same year. And I thought, okay, December is summer. You get some cumulus cloud, it'll get bumpy underneath it, and you might not get above it, and I still could get an afternoon storm. And I thought, oh, okay, we'll play it by ear. Okay, John, we'll do it. So on the given day, I toddled out to the airfield, and I'd booked an aircraft that I was familiar with. I had about 50-odd hours in that particular aircraft, little Grumman. You don't hear of them anymore, Grumman Cheetah. They had the Tiger, the Cheetah, and the Lynx. They were all the singles. The Tiger had 180 motor, the Cheetah had 160, and the Lynx had a 115 horse motor. Basically a trainer, and there was a twin on the way, but I don't have a multi-engine rating, so stuck to the single. And I'm fairly confident I would have booked the Tiger because it had a 180 horse motor. And when you put more than 2 people on board, you need that extra grunt, okay? The 160 motor was okay, but when you loaded it up, it struggled a bit. And we had 3 adults, overnight gear, John's sound gear, which I didn't load, and I only realised when we unloaded the aircraft how heavy it was. We might, I don't like putting that on record, but we might have been close to being overloaded, all right? I'll say we're on the limit. Unknown to me, like dear old Job in the Bible, unknown to him there'd been this conversation between God and the devil. Okay, you can have a go at him, but you can't kill him. Unknown to me, the owner of the aircraft had changed the propeller. Now, if you're not in aviation, I'll try and put it in simple terms. It was a fixed pitch prop, okay? On a more upmarket or sophisticated aircraft, you have a variable pitch, constant speed propeller so that you have maximum power for takeoff, but you change the pitch for your cruise mode. That way it all works better. The aerodynamics change. But for lower cost, it's a fixed pitch, which means you get all the power you want for your takeoff and climb, but your cruise is compromised. So the owner had changed the prop. And in cruise mode, you got another 10 knots, which I found out once I levelled out. But I was already stressed out by that time because it almost did not get off the ground. We loaded it up. When I got to the airport, the operator was actually defueling it. She was taking fuel out of the tanks just so that I'd have just sufficient and a reserve to get to Taree. Otherwise, I would have been overloaded. Nothing registered. Why? Nobody told Bill that you've got a severely performance decreased aeroplane. When do you find out? When you're trying to get it off the ground. Good fun. By which time I was starting to get stressed, by the way. When you give it full throttle, you get everyone's on board, you give it, your flight plans in, do all your preliminaries, and you line up the runway, the tower gives you cleared for takeoff. Full throttle. There's only two things to do. Keep the thing straight down the runway, get your airspeed up, stick back at 55 knots and get it off the ground. And I'm more than halfway down the runway, 45 knots. I said, what's wrong? What are you doing wrong, fella? Start to blame myself already. What are you doing wrong? Well, there's not much you can do wrong. It's a simple aeroplane. When you get used to it, it's easier to handle than driving your car because you haven't got to look out for some clown who won't give you right of way. And all that's taken care of for you. But it didn't want to get off the ground. And I'm at a situation where either we leave the ground or I've got to pull the throttle or we're going to hit the fence. And I'm thinking I've got about 2 to 3 seconds now to make a decision. And it just came unstuck. Well, that's it, you're committed. There's no going back on the ground, that's it. Because within the 3 or 4 seconds, the tin shed on the other side of the fence is underneath you. And it's barely climbing. Well, you've got to get to 500 feet in your runway direction before you can make your first turn. It was right-hand circuit, so you've got to make a right turn, climb up to 1,000 feet, clear the control zone, then you can climb and continue your cruise to your destination. Struggling to climb. I reckon I infringed Brisbane control zone before I made my right turn. The law is 500 feet before your turn. Now, typically, you'll get 500 feet and you buzz off well within the control zone boundary of that aerodrome. I reckon I was in another control zone boundary when I did it. But nobody got on the radio and complained, so I thought I'd just leave it go at that. So you level out. Now, in those days, I don't know what the rule is now, you had to clear the zone at 1,000 feet when you're departing because the inbound traffic is coming above you at 1,500 feet. So you've got a 500-foot buffer. Then you watch each other. You have to be aware. It's called a see and avoid scenario, so you don't have a mid-air. Level out, all of a sudden, the speed's up to 120 knots. I was expecting 110. That's how I found out it worked better with a coarse prop. But the compromise is you don't get full power for takeoff. I was on my takeoff roll down that runway, I was 250 RPM short. I'm looking for 2650 to 2700 revs. I've got 2450, barely making 2500. You might think, well, it's not even a 10% difference. That last 10% makes a lot of difference when you're trying to get that thing airborne. I thought, it's you, fella, I'm blaming myself, without realising I'm already starting to get fairly stressed out. And so your decision-making performance ability is severely diminished. So we head down south towards the border ranges. As you're probably aware, the mountains between Queensland and New South Wales, the Great Divide comes right down to the coast. And in fact, if you realise that Mount Warning and the Gold Coast, that rim is a huge volcanic rim. If ever it came to life and blew again, the entire Gold Coast would be blown out of existence. I just wonder if one day that might happen. I don't know. It's just a supposition. But of course, we were cruising down there and I'm looking towards the border. I'm looking at the horizon because the forecast said 3 octaves of cloud. An octa is an eighth. At the level that I wanted to cruise at, the cloud component should have been about 3/8. They call it octaves. 8/8 is overcast. As a visual pilot, you can't go above that. You've got to stay under it. You've got to fly visually, visual reference to the ground, boom, boom, boom. Looking ahead of me, it was overcast and on the mountaintops. So I thought, this is not good. So by the time we get there, which is only a matter of minutes, I'm looking for a way through. Mistake number 2. Number 1 was taking off when I didn't have full power. Mistake number 2. I start looking for a way through. No, Charlie. That was way past time to turn around and go home. Call it quits. Or call up and get a clearance to go fly down, come down the coast where you're clear of it all, and the air traffic controllers would get you through. But as I said, the decision-making ability had gone out the window. The long and the short of it was, I got into a situation where I could not go ahead. To my right was a valley, and had it been clear, I could have gone down the valley all the way through to Casino, which is up on your northern part of your state here. I've been to Casino a number of times and sort of knew my way around, but I had no way of knowing that once I went down there, I had no way of knowing if I'd ever get out. Cloud can come in behind you, and I had no way of knowing if I'd get out the other end. I couldn't go ahead, didn't like going to the right. On my left was this rim of the huge volcanic crater, which is around the Gold Coast. And I looked up at it and I thought, I'll get over that. Like I said, I had 50-something hours in that particular airplane. It was an extension of me. And so, just turned it to the left, full throttle, and then I remembered, this thing doesn't climb. And it occurred to me, I wasn't going to get over. In fact, Len said to me, Len was on my right, Len, our national president. I gave him a doozy of a black eye that day, and not deliberately. He hit the compass, He said, we're not going to make it, mate. I said, you're right. And then, boom, that was it. There was a loud bang and everything went quiet. Now, you might say, well, why didn't you turn out of it? Well, I was already flying at stall speed. When an airplane stalls, it doesn't mean the engine stops. It means it stops flying, okay? And when that happens, it just drops. You might drop a wing, but the nose will go down. I thought, but the issue being, if you're in a turn, your stall speed comes up. You stall at a much higher speed. So if you're at a stall speed for wings level, it's different the moment your wings do that. You draw the vector diagrams and you work it out mathematically. So I thought, if I turn, we're dead meat. And I was hoping we'd get over it, wishing that scrub and rocks get out of the way. Straight into it. Took out a decent tree. The tree ripped the wings off. That was my brakes. Because the thing ended up nose down into the side of a hill, kind of like that. I've got some photos here. They're getting a bit faded now, but you can have a look in a minute. And it went very, very quiet. And then I started giving myself a real dressing down. I thought, good on you, Bill. You've done it this time. You're dead. You've killed your mates. All your fault, Has anyone ever gone through that kind of self-condemnation thing when something goes wrong? You know what I'm talking about, Tim? Well, I certainly did on December 1, 1984 at about 8:45 in the morning. And I just sat there. Now, this aircraft has no doors. Well, it doesn't now, and it didn't then. It had a sliding hatch. You slid the canopy back. Perspex canopy, it slid back. Well, needless to say, it was just jammed in place. The wings were gone. The thing was nose down. Whatever fuel was left in the remains of the fuel tank was now running down the sides of the aircraft and into the engine bay, which is pretty hot. And the voice behind me says, I want to get out, I want to get out, I want to get out. And that was John. I thought, he can't talk, he's dead, and I'm dead, and Len's dead, and it's my fault. And this weird, surreal kind of scenarios going on in my mind. I want to get out, says John. And I thought, oh, well, maybe we're not dead. In fact, we're still in the airplane, so, that scene didn't fit. So I started to come to my senses, and we had to kick out the windscreen and then crawl out over the engine cowling, over the instrument panel, over the engine cowling to get out, which we did. And that's when I realised that this whole engine bay is hot. And I could smell the fuel. We would have had about 120 to 150 litres of fuel. I probably would have only burnt 30 of that off by the time we took off. I mean, they burn fuel a lot faster than your car because you run that engine at high revs. So we piled out, and Johnny's in a bit of shock. Oh, I saw some bushwalkers, I'll go find them. I said, no, John, you stay here. Whatever we do, we stay together. Oh, I'm going to go up there and climb that tree. John, we're staying together. Don't go away. Now, I read some of the rules of what you do in a scene like that. I was still legally, if not morally, responsible for these two other fellows. Certainly legally, my responsibility. So I had to do what I could to ensure that we stayed together. That worked. After I found the fire extinguisher and I shoved it in his hand, I said, John, read the instructions. Len and I will unpack the aircraft. You be ready in case it catches fire. Right, deal with it. Like if it caught fire, there was no chance, but I had to get this man occupied so that he wouldn't run off. I mean, it's rugged country. You get lost in there. You get lost, they wouldn't find you for months, quite possibly. The wreck was subsequently recovered and taken back to Archerfield to stop bushwalkers going in there because it's national park. It's a New South Wales national park. It's the border ranges. It was on this side of the border. So Len and I unpacked it, and I thought, oh, I need the radio. Now the antenna cable goes up to the antenna on the top of the fuselage, just above the baggage compartment. And I'm on the radio trying to talk. Put out a call on the International Distress Channel, which is 121.5, it's VHF. Not a sausage. I thought, I know the radio's working, I can tell. When you press the button, you know it's actually working. I thought, well, a fat lot of good the international distress frequency is. No one will talk to you. Great. And then I'm looking back and I see Len getting the baggage out. I said, Len, above you is the antenna. It should have a cable running up there. Oh, he says, you mean this thing here? And he's got the cable in his hand. He said, where does it go? Up here? I said, yeah, see if it'll fit into the connector. It'll come out of a connector. And if you push hard, it'll just sit there and make enough electrical contact. So he pushed it back. In the meantime, I changed to a different radio frequency on the aircraft radio for that particular part of the country. Still the same, 119.5. Why can I remember that? Well, I don't know. And I just put out a call. I made a Mayday call. I mean, a bit late for a Mayday call, but already crashed. I'm not in trouble about to get crashed. I have crashed. But anyway, it gets attention, you see. And another pilot came straight back to me. He said, I believe I'm in a twin so-and-so. I believe I'm right above you. Because I gave him what I thought was my position. He said, just stand by. He said, I'm going to change the pitch of one of my engines, one of my props, and it changes the engine note, and you'll hear it. When you go in a commercial flight, even with the jets, you'll know, they just start up and the two engines are running, but they're not exactly synchronised. And you get this beat note, a very low frequency beat note, just a slight variation. It means one's going faster than the other. And when they get them exactly synchronised, the only reason for synchronising them is so that it don't annoy you, because it'll drive you batty. And it's the same in twins. Well, this guy did that. I said, I can hear you. You're right above me, because it's overcast, it's cloud. Above me was the tree canopy, it's regrowth rainforest, secondary regrowth rainforest, and then cloud. So I can't see him, and I'm not licensed to fly above it. So he immediately gives his position to Brisbane, because by this time, they've gone into the first phase of a search and rescue. There's 5 phases. It starts off with an alert phase. I didn't report, they are alerted, and they call, no answer. Then it goes into second stage, next phase, until a physical rescue is in place. And they went through all of that. But now they know where we are, because this dude let them know. And I wish today I'd kept some notes of all this, but I didn't, because you might run into some of these people down the road. I did run into one, and he was the helicopter pilot who fished us out. So he gives his position, and I thought, fellas, here's what's going to happen. We are going to go out on helicopter, so pack up what you've got, get the packed lunch you brought that I asked you to bring with you, because we would have to eat our lunch on board due to the length of it. Would have been about a 3 to 4 hour flight, and eat your lunch. And that's one thing you won't have to carry with you. So we did all that. I can't tell you what I had, probably a ham sandwich, and waited. And it was about an hour and a half before the first chopper came in. That was a Westpac rescue chopper on the Gold Coast. You know the Carrara football field up there where the Titans play? I'm not one of their fans, but it doesn't matter. There's a Westpac helicopter base with state emergency service nearby. And he was the first one in. And he put a guy down on a winch. I wonder if I've ever seen an angel sometimes. I might have done it not knowing. But I reckon that angel had orange overalls on. I don't know what your state emergency service wear in New South Wales, but in Queensland they wear orange. And this dude came down on the winch. I found out later there was 115 foot of winch wire out. That's a fair bit. And he said, "G'day, my name's so-and-so." I've forgotten his name. He says, "I'm a dentist." I said, "Really?" I said, "I wasn't expecting a dentist." He said, "Well, mate, I'm a volunteer with the SCS, and I just happened to be returning some gear." And they said, "There's a live call, John, get on the aircraft, you're going." So it was a bit of a buzz for him. And he was the guy who came down on the winch. He said, "Who's first?" I said, "Him." I pointed to John, and John said, "You'll bring me gear, won't you? You'll bring me a guitar." He had 12-string guitar. Now, you know, they're special. They're a lot more expensive than your standard 6-string. And his bag of cable and sound gear, and I thought, when I went to lift it, I thought, "Really, dooley." No wonder the sucker wouldn't climb, you know. I said, "You're first." So they put the sling on you. Have you ever seen what they do? There's a wire, but the sling you put over there so that the bit where it joins up comes under your arms, round your back, under your arms, it goes up. So the only thing you're not allowed to do is say, "Praise the Lord." If you do that, you fall out of the sling. Okay. You've got to keep your arms down. And so they start winding him in. But the downwash of the chopper starts sending John on an orbit. He starts swinging around little circles on this wire. Not only that, he started spinning on it. So he's like the Earth going around the sun. He's making little rotations on a wider orbit on the end of the wire. And as he did this, he bumped against a tree, and a vine off that tree took a loop around his neck. And he was nearly hanged on the winch. And nobody saw it. I didn't see it. The fella on the ground with a little talkie-talkie to the bloke in the chopper didn't see it. The fella on the chopper watching him, controlling the winch, he didn't see it. And it was only when John told me later, he said, "I felt the vine break before my neck would have broken." Who was behind all that?
Devil.
I think I had one of the worst weeks of my life leading up to that Saturday morning. I'm not going to go into all the detail. It was a horrible, horrible week. I look back now, it was just oppression, dark oppression. Such that on the Friday, I phoned up a man who used to work at his office in the city of Brisbane for the sole purpose of gospel outreach. Dear old George Spall, he passed away at about age 84. Had a little bookshop there, people could just drop in, make a coffee. He'd do lunch hour, Bible studies, you walked in, made your coffee, ate your lunch, walked out when you had to, and he would just keep going. I think his son was a pastor of the Cannon Hill Baptist Church, one of the Baptist churches that got the Holy Ghost, you know. Dear old George. And I felt so in need that by the Friday, I phoned him up in the morning. I said, "George, it's Bill, can I come and see you today?" Around about 12:30, my lunch break. I worked at South Brisbane at the TAFE College there. And I could walk across that bridge up to his office in about 15 minutes, 20 minutes. Yeah, brother, you come in any time. But that's how he did things. Anyone walked in any time. And that's what happened. I was hoping for a special time. I just needed prayer. I just needed help. And when I got there, guess what? Anyone turned up. Other people turned up. They were taking up his time, and ain't going to happen. So I turned around and walked out. I knew I needed some spiritual help, and somebody else managed to make it not happen. And of course, Saturday morning this happened. So we got rescued. Helicopters came in. The Westpac chopper came in first, took John out, and I didn't see it again. His winch failed after that, I found out later. You know, who was behind all this? Fortunately, the SES sent their helicopter out. And then they took Len, and then the guy on the ground, the dentist, said to me, we're going for a walk. It's too hard to get you guys out of here. There's a better place. We're going for a hike. And so he took me for a hike. I determined that I would be the last to go. And he took me to this place. He said, right, sit here. It's going to be a few minutes, because he's in talkie-talkie contact with other people managing the whole event. How's that time? 9:15. And he sat me down on a log or a rock or something. And the worst part of the whole event happened then. I just happened to wave my arm out, and I brushed against a gympie tree. Does anyone know what a gympie tree is? No? All right, very quickly. A gympie tree has a single trunk, probably not much more than that round, whatever that is in centimetres. And it has these very broad, fuzzy-looking leaves. And when you brush against them, it's worse than a stinging nettle. You know, stinging nettle, you can actually eat the stuff once you boil it up. But you brush against a stinging nettle and all those furry things inject this poison into you. But a gympie bush is worse. They might have another name in New South Wales. We have a town of Gympie in Queensland. So I don't know how it got its name. And I brushed against this thing. And my hand was just stinging and hurting like crazy. And that's all I could think about. I've just been stung by a gympie tree. I didn't care that I'd written off some dude's aeroplane and nearly killed the three of us. I was stinging. I was hurting from this gympie bush. So eventually they come and take us out in the chopper. And they had this little clearing where the Channel 9 news helicopter had already got his news footage and was leaving. Didn't want me in the picture. And I thought, oh, okay, that's how important I am. And then I had barely got out of the SES rescue helicopter, and this dude comes striding towards me, a little short man. He had a white shirt, a dark belt, white shorts, long socks and shoes. Don't remember his name. He looked up at me and he said, what do you mean by coming to see your medico looking like that, you grubby looking so-and-so? He said some other words that I won't put on the tape. I thought, who is this clown? He said, mate, I'm the doc, are you okay? They had a doctor ready for us. They had the old Southport hospital, it's been demolished now, and they've got the new Gold Coast hospital. They had that on standby for us. See, I'll say this about the aviation world, they do their best to look after you. It's rather good. And he said, you okay? I said, yeah, I think I'm okay. A bit of skin off the nose, a bit off here, and I was a bit grubby because when we hiked through the bush, it was muddy. And my nice clean shirt and everything was a bit grotty. Well, he said, your mates seem to be okay, and you're okay? He said, I'll go. I said, yeah, okay. And so the chopper pilot came back to me, he said, mate, we're taking you all back to Archerfield now. Jump in the chopper. I said, John had asked me to bring his gear. I said, yeah, John will bring your gear. But I lied to him. I said, I decided I wasn't going to bring his gear. And when the guys came down on the winch, they said, we can't take your gear. I said, I promised John I'd take his gear. If the gear doesn't go, I'm not going. I'll walk home. And the bloke scratched his head. I don't know what to do about that. I said, it's simple. We put the gear in the helicopter. And we did. We put everything back that we needed. So we get back to Archerfield. They've got the safety car waiting for us, and the safety officer comes out and meets us, and he said, boys, all the press, the TV are here, wanting some video of you fellas. But he said, I'm going to take you down to the first aid station first and get you cleaned up. We're a bit messy, okay? And so we did that. We're down the first aid station, and John's still a bit in shock. He said, "Oh, ring Deb." Deb was his wife at the time. They sadly since parted company. But I said, "John, you're not phoning her." Now, it was not my role to tell him what he can and can't do. But I was not going to let him phone his wife because she can't see him. I thought, if she can see him, she'll be okay. But when you can't see them, your mind makes up other pictures and it will be worse for her. So I put my finger on the thing, on the hook on the phone. I said, "You're not calling her, John." And I wouldn't let him use the phone. So the first aid man cleaned us up a bit. Then we had to do the TV camera bit. We're all on the 6 o'clock news that night, except the ABC, they didn't turn up. The other three were. And then Len Donaldson had his ute parked at the aerodrome so that we could get home Sunday night. So I said, "John, we'll take you home." He lived at Holland Park, south side. The other two of us, we live out the north side. We're still there in the same houses we had back then. So we took John home. Deb came out of her house just as we pulled up at the front yard. She was in tears, but I thought, at least she can see him. So it'll be okay. So we left him there and I went home. It was quite hilarious, and I didn't want to take this long, but my wife's parents were visiting. And we have a high-set, Queenslander, so she's up on the front patio at the front of the house. Her dad was sitting in his car waiting to go home, and her mother was standing outside the car, just having a chat, mother and daughter chat, and we pull up in the driveway. I've got two driveways. We pull up in the other one. And I got out, and my dear mother-in-law, since gone to be with the Lord, bless her, says, "How'd you get here?" I said, "Oh, Nanny," everyone called her Nanny. She was Nanny Wallace. "Oh, Nanny, it's like this. We hit the mountain and the helicopters came in and brought us home, and that's about it." And she thought, "You're just having another go at me, you're lying so-and-so," because practical jokes was the order of the day. You'd phone them up and put on a funny accent and then they hang up on you. We did that all the time. My son does it too. We still do that kind of thing. "How'd you really get here?" I'm thinking, silly lady, you're asking the wrong question. You should be asking, why are you home now instead of tomorrow night? She says, "How'd you really get here?" I said, "Like I said, we hit the mountains just over the border and the helicopters came in and they brought us home." "Goodbye, dear. We'll see you later. Come on, Bruce, we're going home." That was the end of that conversation. And she didn't get it until she saw the 6 o'clock news, and then we were on the front page of the Sunday paper the next day. Shared the front page of the Sunday Mail with Bob Hawke. That was his first re-election. So he got the top half of the Sunday Mail. That's the big Sunday newspaper in Brisbane. And the bottom half was us. 3 saved in aircraft accident, ... Thank God. Printed it. Mentioned the name of God in the Sunday newspaper. It's a bit rare, isn't it? All of that to say that I didn't understand what was happening that week. I do now. It's easy to have hindsight. But the Lord knows where you're at. He knows what you're going through. And despite what you state, Brother Paul, that it was a dark hand trying to have his way with us. Still here, pal. We're still here. And I can have a chuckle about it. I didn't have too many chuckles for about a year because I had a few phone calls that weekend. And one of them was from a man in Bundaberg, in whose home I used to stay. I used to go to Bundy, known for their rum, right? I don't drink the stuff, but if I say Bundy rum, it's made in Bundaberg up on north of Brisbane. Used to go there a fair bit for FGBMFI matters, used to fly there a lot. So, and I'd stay in Roy's house and he phoned me because he was on the board or committee of the Australian Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association. And he used to put a column in the monthly magazine that came out, and he was the Queensland rep. And he phoned me, he said, "Right, Bill, here's what you do, but here's what you don't do." He said, "What you must do is talk to the investigator, because he's going to come and see you. You must answer his questions completely and honestly. And that's it, pal. When the insurers ring you, do not talk to them, do not make statements, do not sign documents." I said, "Why?" He said, "Because they will pay the claim and then sue you." He said, "Malcolm Fraser gave them that." I said, "Really?" We went knocking on doors to help him get elected. I said, "Thanks, pal." He wasn't in office very long, was he? I say that because I went through the best part of a year with a fair bit of darkness. I suppose it would be close to, say, moments of depression that would last for days. I didn't know what it was, but I had this fear of being sued and sent bankrupt. Because when I answered the investigator's questions, I asked him, I said, how much of this becomes public knowledge? How much of what I'm saying to you goes into the hands of the insurers? He said, all of it. I said, and? He said, well, they've got 5 years, Bill, to sue you. And he said, you'd be surprised that when that period is nearly up, we get a lot of phone calls, people wanting information, and we have to give it to them under freedom of information. I said, terrific, so I've got 5 years to sweat. He said, basically, yes. Terrific. And that bothered me for about a year. And then after that, it didn't bother me. But what was interesting, I remember saying to the investigator, and I watched him write the notes, I said, you know, the owner of the aircraft, the owner and or operator, had changed the propeller configuration. They put a cruise prop on it, which severely degraded the takeoff and climb performance. I said, if I'd had the standard prop, I know I would have got over that hill. That aeroplane was part of me and I was part of it. You know, you know what you can do and what your limitations are. And in its original configuration, I would have got over it. I hit it about 200 foot from the top. Didn't miss by much, that much, 99. He never printed it in his report. The report basically said pilot error. The pilot failed to maintain the aviation jargon. My fault. And I read that and I thought that's a bit unfair. But hey, I'm still here. Captain Collins and his DC-10 died on Mount Erebus in Antarctica because somebody on the ground did something wrong. And he didn't have any knowledge of it. And he never got to find out. And he was a far more professional pilot than I would ever be. So I consoled myself with those thoughts. I'm not the only one. And 16 years later, the year 2000, the same year that I took Len over to Perth to see Don before he died, I went to an air show in a little town called Caboolture, half an hour's drive north of Brisbane. It's a nice big aerodrome, country aerodrome, and a lot of representation from industry and government were there. And here's this little tent booth thing from Safety Mob. And guess what? Here's the dude that interviewed me. And I rocked up to him and I said, g'day, remember me? He said, well, which one were you? And I said, Grumman Cheetah, Sierra Zulu Victor, December 1, 1984, Border Ranges National Park. POB3, you know, no fatalities, but I just read out. I read it. I gave it to him in jargon that he would understand like that. Oh, well, how are you? I said, well, I'm all right, but I got a bone to pick with you, pal. What are you talking about? I said, I remember watching you write in your notes that the aircraft had been modified with a cruise propeller. I said, I nearly didn't get off the ground. And the reason I hit that jolly hill was it wouldn't climb. Oh, mate, he says, I wouldn't have understood what that meant at the time. I'm going, you got to be joking. You're the investigator. It's your job to know. But I didn't say it. I felt it. It made me a bit angry. Because I put on record. It's still there. If you read the record now, it hasn't been changed. It says the pilot got it wrong. But he said to me, I would have written you a letter. And the letter would have included, word for word, my report that would go into the publication, which is the Aviation Safety Digest, otherwise known as the horror or the crash comics, because every 2 months you get one of these and have all the accidents and incidents, fatalities, one series. You know, it just tabulates everything that happened in straight jargon, no blame, just what happened, just the facts. You sometimes wonder why you keep flying after you read one of them. You know, it's not very exciting reading. And I went home and I found his letter, which said, if you are not completely satisfied with the accuracy or the intent of this report, you have 14 days to question it and it will be changed. And I had opened the letter, but I did nothing about it. So really, I had the chance and didn't take it. So our time is moving on. I have here, and what I might do, they're getting a bit faded. Just flick through them and you can see what we walked out of. So you might just want to have it flick through and pass them around. The investigator gave them to me, or it might have been the operations guy, because I had to go for an interview with the operations people. I said, mate, I've had this interview, the safety thing. He said, no. He said, that was a safety guy. He said, they publish a report, we take action. I thought, uh-oh, you know, am I going to go to jail? What's going to happen? But he said to me, it's not my call. I have to now report to the Chief Examiner of Airmen, and he will decide what's going to happen to you. By the way, the kind of action I'm talking about means maybe some recommended further training, something like that to help you stay safe in the air. That's what we're talking about. And I thought, oh, that makes me feel a bit better. But when I entered that building, it used to be in Fortitude Valley, I ran into 3 men from the fellowship, or 3 Christian men. One was my own chapter president, because he worked there. And there were 2 other people. I said, g'day guys, today's the day I get the, you know. Oh, well, we'll pray. Let's pray for you. He had the 3 people praying for me while I was getting the interview, you see. And so I had to have a little break. I went back, and the dude was waiting outside his office. And the Chief Examiner of Airmen saw me coming in. He took off. It's this boy's job to tell him, not the boss. So he took off. And the man's whole demeanour had changed. He was an ex-military pilot. He even said to me, he said, you know, Bill, you trained to a budget. I've been trained at your expense, a taxpayer, to fly to the limit. He said, I was an army pilot. Now this is operations department. He can get the big stick out. They can take a lot of action and you've got no defence. You can't question it. What they do, they do. That's it. His whole demeanour had changed. He was sitting behind his chair, he's fidgeting, he's going, he wouldn't look at me, had no more eye contact. He said, Chief Examiner thinks that because it's now, you know, 6 months, boom, 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 he said, by the way, you can have your licence back. Because he was going to take my licence and stop me from flying for 6 months just to let me know that they can do that. I thought, dear God, you heard those dudes' prayer. You know, even then, the hand of the Lord was on me. They didn't take my licence away. Not that I did a lot with it, because this was at a time when my income was going south and costs were going north. Went for an interesting year, got through it. Because of shortage of time, I'm not going to get through my list. It's now 9. When do you normally wind up, John? Around about now? Soon. Okay. I'll go through these very quickly. I had a near miss in the circuit area at Archerfield. In the days of the old square circuit, if I can explain, you had, supposing this was the landing strip coming this way here, from me towards you, you had to overfly 1,500 feet, descend down to 1,000 feet, join up what they call the downwind leg of this position, fly the downwind leg, then you start what they call base leg and then final approach. At heights and distances that you have up here, like it's written and that you can't change it. On the basis of see and avoid. It's up to you to separate yourself from the others and up to them to separate themselves from you. Nobody tells you. Even if there's a controller in the tower watching what's going on, they don't tell you what to do. This other dude, so I'm beetling down, you know, 93 knots down this downward leg, and this other dude comes and makes his descending turn like that across my nose. Missed me by, 200 foot away. 60, 70 metres. I mean, I was looking at the oil streaks running down from the engine bay the side of his aircraft. It upset me a lot. This was subsequent to the other event. I spoke to the guy on the ground. He could not have cared less. The fact that he nearly killed me, himself and his passenger, and who else on the ground would have been hit by the wreckage of 2 aircraft, no longer able to fly, because that's what would have happened. He did not care. And it made me very angry, so I just had to walk away before I punched him on the nose. And that would have put me in jail, and I would have wanted. But those things happen. I had a fuel spill up at the RAF base. I had 12 years in the Air Force Reserve. Somebody turned the fuel pumps on an aircraft in the hangar that had the engine taken out. And in a matter of 2 minutes, you're sloshing around in AV2 about that deep in the hangar floor. And I was frozen on the floor. I was working on that aircraft. I thought, Bill, this is not going to be a nice way to die. It's going to go up. It's got to go. And I froze. And a little voice said to me, get out. Just walk. So I started walking. I walked up to our little hut and I said to my flight sergeant, I said, hey, your mate just flooded the hangar with F2. That's the RAF term for aviation, gasoline, Jet A. They call it Jet A4 or something in the civilian world. And he looked at me over his glasses, put the newspaper down. I said, why aren't you working? I said, Vic, I should say flight sergeant, but I said, Vic, we're on first name terms. I said, your mate, and I mentioned his name, just flooded the hangar with F2. What do I do? He said, sit down over there and make yourself look like you're doing something useful. Not your problem. I thought, if that thing goes up, our hut will go with it. We're only a short walk away. The blast would have just blown us away. 45 minutes later, the fireys turned up and hosed it out. Let you think what you like about that one. But that was a near miss in my book. That's 3. There are others, but I better cut it short. I wanted to mention my son. I shared this with the men at a breakfast a couple of months ago. Young Pete is now 37. When he was 16, he was in high school and playing trumpet and not doing too bad. The local conservatorium does an honours band weekend every year where the schools are invited to send 1, 2 or 3 of their best musicians, and they make up a couple of large bands. They get together, they practice Friday nights, all day Saturday, Sunday they put on a concert for the parents and school thing. To get them sucked into the uni environment and go to con, be a musician, I guess. And young Pete had been a bit of a hypochondriac, any opportunity to get, sick, I've got a headache, any excuse. But he was a tall, lanky, fairly fit young fella. And we went to the Friday night thing, dropped him off, 4 hours work. Sunday morning he gets up, Dad, I'm not well. I said, don't you start swinging the lead on me, pal. I said, you get yourself in there and give it your best shot. Oh, you might have to bring me home. And at 12:30 he rang, he said, I'm not well. I said, all right, I'll come and get you. I made him carry his own gear into the car because I was illegally parked. I'm just not happy, Jan, And I noticed then he can't keep up with me. Now that's unusual. I usually can't keep up with him. Got him in the car, drove across the Story Bridge. Oh, Dad, it hurts, my chest hurts. And I thought, maybe this is for real. I said, okay, what say we get you checked out? I didn't want to say doctor, hospital, but I needed to get help. And friends, as honestly, as surely as I'm standing here, I do not recall now how I ended up at the gate of the hospital, the old Royal Brisbane, where you had to stop at the gate for the guard. It's different now, okay, you can drive into the drop-off. And he said, righto, drop him off and move your car, you can't park here. So I did that, I came back, he was in, the nurse came out to see me. The nurse was the man, the doctor was the lady. He said, I'm not supposed to tell you what's going on. I said, has he got a collapsed lung? He said, yes, but I didn't tell you. Doctor will see you in a minute. Doctor takes me in, shows me the x-ray. He's not going home for 6 nights, collapsed lung. Here's how I'm treating him. Boom, boom, boom. You can stay and watch the procedure. They're going to cut him open and stick a tube. I said, I don't want to see that, thank you. So I just said, turned to my boy, I said, I'm going home. I'll get your mother and your toothbrush. We'll be back tonight. Just after I left, they had to resuscitate him. His heart stopped and his breathing stopped. And to this day, I'm glad I wasn't there. He was in the right hands. I don't know how I got him to hospital. I don't remember driving there, but he was in the right hands. So now he's 37 and doing what he does. Folks, there's a few more things I could say. I had a list, but we are definitely out of time. I think tonight, it's an opportunity to be reassured of the hand of our Lord on our lives. And a chance to share in a fellowship like this, and to be encouraged one with the other, that we might do just that, encourage one another, bring folk who need to hear a message that there is a God, He loves us through Jesus Christ. He has given us a power through the Holy Spirit that we get in the full gospel message to call upon His name and see Him do mighty things in us and through us. And it's my prayer and my hope that that's what we will continue to do, all of us, by the look of things, in pretty senior years. The youngster is this man over here, Stuart. You're the youngster amongst us tonight, aren't you? So that's it for tonight. So perhaps with that in mind, I wonder if, well, firstly, is there anyone who from this group would like prayer for yourself or some given situation? I don't claim to have any special anointing. The Lord gave it to me one night and saw me work in a way that, well, we're out of time. That was another story all of its own. But it's not something that happens every day. But what we do have every day is the ability to share with one another, to join with one another, to encourage one another, to exhort one another, to lay hands on and pray with one another. And say that despite the grey hair, or whatever you've got left, He's not done with us yet. So I hope that has been meaningful to you tonight. I've enjoyed coming here. And any questions?